Hello and welcome back to Cooking the Books with me, Gilly Smith. And this week, a special extended episode. We're coming live from the British Library in London, whose food season has been tantalising food fans for a whole month in May of talks inspired by the cookbooks, recipes and culinary stories in the British Library collection. Speakers have included Jessica Harris, Angela Hartnett, Ainsley Harriott, Dan Saladino, Alice Waters, and my panel of experts exploring 13th century Moorish cookery through an absolutely extraordinary story. Come and sit with the sold-out audience as Polly Russell, curator of the food season, introduces Sam and Sam Clarke of Moro to the stage with Arabic scholar Nawal Nasrallah and British Library curator of Arabic manuscripts, Bink Hallum.
This is like a sort of dream come true, this event for me, and I hope for all of you as well. It is such an exciting subject and venture, bringing together an amazing treasure that was discovered at the British Library, the most phenomenal translation by a scholar, Nawal, then bringing that amazing text into conversation with Sam and Sam Clarke, who I'm sure you all know are the fantastic restaurateur owners of Moro. So this is just the most brilliant kind of bringing together of worlds. I'm just going to very quickly introduce Gilly Smith, who is doing the job of chairing. Gilly is a fantastic voice in food. She's the earliest adopter of podcasting and food. Some of you may know her from the Delicious podcast, which she did for 4 years, and now she has the most wonderful podcast called Cooking the Books, which explores cookery books in the most kind of vibrant and exciting ways with the people who wrote them. And so she is absolutely the perfect person to be chairing this session. Over to you, Gilly.
Thank you very much, Polly. For those of you who don't know about Cooking the Books, it does take a deep dive into the thinking behind the food books with the authors. So this is a really exciting way of exploring a book that you're not really very likely to pick up at Waterstones. It is 800 pages long. It is a vast, vast book, 474 recipes, Noel, is that right?
Yeah, but detailed ones.
But it is, today we're talking about the story behind the book. It is literally treasure. I'm accompanied by this wonderful panel to help me tell this story. Let's just talk about Bink Hallum. You're the curator for Arabic scientific manuscripts at the British Library and Wellcome Fellow in Medical Humanities at the University of Warwick. It's his interest in alchemy, medicines and poisons and elixirs rather than food that led to the discovery, and we'll find out why. We were talking a little bit earlier about how different alchemy is to food. I'm constantly talking about alchemy in Cooking the Books because it is taking one thing and taking another thing and turning it into something quite magical. So we're in good company today. Nawal Nasrallah is much more than a translator of the book, it has to be said. The book, I had a wonderful opportunity to spend 2 hours, just 2 hours, absorbing myself in it at the British Library last week, and it was really quite extraordinary. I'm told that it is the nearest to the original voice as possible, considering we're talking about a 13th century male writer who wasn't even a scholar. Nawal specialises in the history and culture of Arabic food. She's best known for her cookbook featuring Iraqi cuisine, Delights from the Garden of Eden, 2003, which contains more than 400 recipes again and won the Gourmand World Cookbook Award. Most of you will know Sam and Sam Clarke. They are arguably the chefs who introduced Moorish cooking to Britain back in 1997, when Britain was just waking up to great food to discuss from around the world. They'd worked together at London's first proper gastropub, the Eagle, handily placed next to the Guardian and the Observer, which is, I'm sure, why so many people spread the word, before joining Ruth Rogers and Rose Gray at the River Cafe, one of the most influential restaurants in London's food scene, and which, arguably, was one of the creators of modern British cuisine. From there, they set up their own restaurant, Moro, which celebrates the flavours of the southern Mediterranean. The book that we are talking about is called Best of Delectable Foods and Dishes from Al-Andalus and Al-Maghrib, and is the English translation of the 13th century cookbook. Now, I'm going to ask Nawal to do this. We did practice it. I am so not saying this. Nawal, what's the proper title?
The proper title in Arabic is في طالة الخوان في طيبات الطعام والألوان.
There you go. It's written initially by the Andalusi scholar Ibn Razin al-Tajubi.
Ibn Razin, yeah.
Ibn Razin al-Tajubi.
Al-Tujibi.
Tujibi.
Yeah.
So we're going to be referring to him as al-Tajubi throughout. And she's written a wonderful introduction and glossary. Now, let us just talk a little bit about the book, but we are going to be talking about why it matters. As a journalist, you always ask that question, so what? What's the relevance for now? We've got the wonderful Sam and Sam Clark to really bring it up to date and give it some context for now. It was written by an extraordinary young man, wasn't it, who wrote the recipes and therefore the lifestyle of the day. So through this book, we are seeing into a time gone by. We are time travelling, ladies and gentlemen. And then we are going to bring it right into your hands with these lovely food boxes by Sam and Sam Clark. Now, we're not going to eat these. We're not touching these until we say so, OK? And there's a reason for that. So you may look, but you may not touch. Bink and Nawal, we're going to start with you. Let's hear this extraordinary story of the treasure. So, Bink, let's start with you. You were, sitting in a room over there in the British Library? Paint us a picture.
So, I'm the curator for Arabic scientific manuscripts here. I work on a digitization project where we're selecting Arabic texts in manuscript on all sorts of sciences, mechanics, astronomy, astrology, geometry, all sorts of things, chemistry, and looking through them, cataloguing them again, digitizing them, making them freely available on the internet. And one of the manuscripts that I'd chosen to catalogue was quite a large manuscript, and according to the early 20th century catalogues, this is just an anonymous work on pharmacopoeia, so it should have lots of recipes in it about how to make drugs, drug compounds for medicinal drugs. And as I started looking through it, I realized there's something wrong here. It's not just one text to begin with. There are lots of different texts on different subjects. And there were some pages missing, and it was really difficult to see where one thing began and the next, one thing finished and the next began. But one thing I could tell for certain is there's a big chunk in the middle, about 200 pages or so, that didn't seem to be about medicine at all. It was recipes, but food recipes, and no real reference to illness or anything like that. And that kind of excited me, but also scared me a bit, because this is not my background. The terminology got very weird. I didn't know what the words meant. And it was only... So that got catalogued. I said, an anonymous cookbook. I didn't really know anything about it. It went on the internet, and then a few months later, I was at a conference about the history of pharmacy and chemistry, and I bumped into a colleague who was interested in these drug recipes, and I told her about this manuscript. And I said, and by the way, there's this huge cookbook right in the middle. And she said, you have to tell Nawal. And I said, who's Nawal? And she gave me Nawal's email address. And I'm sorry, I don't know the culinary material. It's not my background. So then I looked her up, and I said, wow, all these other things, all the cookbooks she's translated, and her fantastic website with all her recipes. And I sent her an email, and it seems that it was perfect timing.
Wow.
Because meanwhile...
I was in my office at home, and I was in the middle of translating this same cookbook. But I was, before the discovery of this book, we had only 2 manuscripts. And unfortunately, both of them were incomplete in varying ways. But because I saw that the book is so important, it's coming from Andalusia, I said that, okay, then I'm going to translate it, but then I wasn't feeling comfortable about this, because my conclusions in the recipe, in the introduction, wouldn't really be complete. It would just be speculations, because I don't know what other recipes are missing. But I resigned myself to this, and I was in the middle of translating the chapter on fish dishes. And that was, before just a little bit before I approached the missing part. So in January 2019, like perhaps the second week of January 2019, an email just, I received an email. It says, I have discovered, I mean, of course, he greeted me and he said, I have discovered a text that I think would interest you. And he told me about it, and he didn't know what it was. And he said now it is available, at Qatar,
Qatar Digital Library.
Yeah, Digital Library, and he gave me the link. So
because Bink had digitized it by that time.
He digitized, yeah, it was digitized. So I went there, and I looked at the first page. I said, well, this text looks familiar to me.
What are the chances?
Yeah.
I mean, this is quite extraordinary.
So I turning, of course, that's metaphorical. I don't turn it. I turn the page, turn 2 pages, 3 pages. Well, that's the text that is Al-Tujibi's text. I kept on, and then I came to the missing parts. And there is the missing part, all the recipes. It's all there in front of me.
What was the feeling, Noel?
Oh, you cannot imagine. I was really thrilled,
I would imagine.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's
And Bink didn't really. It wasn't the same feeling for you, was it? You kind of knew, because you'd found out who to send it to make that connection. When Nawal told you what you had uncovered...
Well, there's another story there. It's not as exciting as the rest of the story. The story there is that I never received the email that she sent back. I've only heard now about the email. Now that we've met 2 days ago...
Oh, my God!
I said, Noel, I never actually got any... But I got a subsequent email a while later that referred back to the first
when
email.
you first heard about this connection, this amazing synchronicity,
when I first heard about
the only person in the world.
When I saw that.
No way.
It's when I saw that, and I thought, oh my goodness. And then, so subsequently I found out that she wrote back, thanking me profusely and saying, oh my goodness, I know who wrote this book, and filling in all the missing details that I had.
That is extraordinary.
But I had to wait. I had to wait a really long time.
I immediately emailed him and thanked him profusely. So I told him perhaps it went to spam. He said no.
Who knows?
What
We're here
we
now.
have is the only telling of 13th century Andalusian food by a very young man.
He wasn't young at the time, too young.
Well, when he wrote it, it was
when
later.
He was perhaps he was in.
But when he was observing the life in Andalusia that he was writing, he left when he was 20. Every element of this is really extraordinary, isn't it? And so what we have is the ability to really step back 800 years to look at a time through its food. And of course, when you're talking about food, you're talking about customs, you're talking about rituals, you're talking about the way that people eat together, what they ate, what was the food from the land. It tells us an enormous about a food, extraordinary amount of information about food. How much did we know about that? Maybe, Noel, that's your kind of question, isn't it?
Well,
we have later.
We have only 2 books that came to us from southern Spain when it was under the Muslim rule. So Al-Tujibi's and an anonymous one, and both of them more or less deal with similar recipes. So, but this one is more elaborate. It is more inclusive, and it is more. It's a complete cookbook, very well organized, and you can easily go through it. And the chapters are, he methodically divides his book into parts, 12 parts. Each part is divided into chapters, and he proceeds so logically from one ingredient to the other until he gets to the hand washing preparations. So it's easily to have an idea of what was available at the time, how they were cooked, and some regional differences, some ethnic differences. You get a glimpse of life at the time, society, agriculture. You get, I think, everything you need to know about the material culture concerning this field. You can rely on it.
Yeah, totally. And let's think about the mind of the man. When you're translating, you have to assume his voice, don't you? And how did you see this man? Who was he to you?
Well, there are two things. I mean, we know something about him, fortunately. This is unusual when you deal with cookbooks, because cookbook writers, sometimes they just put their names on the book. Sometimes they don't put their names altogether on the books because they think it's just a cookbook. I mean, it's not an important text. We have only two books that definitely have names on them. That is Ibn Sayyar al-Warraq, the 10th century cookbook. But in the case of Ibn Sayyar al-Warraq, we only know his name, nothing about him. But this one, it so happens that we know, something about this guy. From a brief biography, we know that he grew up in Murcia, which is in southeast Spain. It was a prosperous city, but at the time when he grew up, of course, Muslim Arabs were losing their grounds to the Christian monarchy. But he lived a good life. We know this because they say he belonged to an intellectual family. And they were so respected and revered by all. So we are sure that he lived a good life, and he enjoyed the best of delectable foods and dishes that he talks about here.
A lot of other people write about him. I love this idea that he wrote the book obviously, but he didn't write about himself. Other people wrote about him. I have an idea of him as sort of somebody who was a host, who had a lot of salons, had lots of learned people, and he cooked. I mean, we don't know that he cooked, but you do say that he writes about. He writes the recipes with the sensibility of a cook.
Correct. Yeah, that's right.
He goes through the kind of the methods as a cook would. Yes. That's unusual for the time?
Yeah, it's usually recipes. If you read them in medieval cookbooks, they will be either they are brief, or they'll be put this, put that, and then like simple things of stews or something. But with this one, we have sometimes 2 pages dealing with one recipe. For example, a stuffed chicken or stuffed squabs. And he tells you how elaborately you can prepare this dish. You clean the bird, you stuff the cavity. Not only that, but you have to loosen the skin between the bones and loosen the skin and separate it from the meat. And the same for the same stuffing. You stuff it between the skin, and then you tie it very well and put it in boiling water. This recipe happens to be boiled, so you put it in a large pot in boiling water. And he said, make sure to have a needle. Hold the needle when you are watching it while boiling. And as you notice that the skin starts to form a bulb, you pierce it. Otherwise, it will, the whole skin will open up, like a burst. Yeah. Only somebody who knows how to cook.
Exactly. Sam, did you pick this up when you were reading through the recipes? Did you smell the chef in him?
The main thing is that it was the enthusiasm comes across. Yes, yeah, which is fantastic. So it's not, we're all talking to a degree about, academia helped to let this book come into the light.
Yeah.
But actually now we've got it in the light, it's a very human, it's just like some foodie overexcitedly.
It is overexcited, isn't it?
Sort of talking. Yeah.
I love the cheese pastry. I was making, I don't know how you pronounce the Polish-Ukrainian term, knicia, I suppose. These lovely little cheese pastries where...
Oh, mujabbana. Yeah.
What are they called?
Mujabbana.
That's
the Arabic version. You get them all over the world. I was using the Eastern European versions. Yeah. But he talks about picking each edge and bringing it forward, doesn't he? And it's a very visceral way of writing. I mean, are you a cook yourself, Nawal? As you assumed the voice of Al-Tujubi, did you become the chef?
Well, you know, I mean, I can see him preparing the dishes. For example, is the same mujabbana, this same mujabbana pastry. He describes the basic one, which is fried. You know, they are formed like small balls stuffed with cheese. So he says you hold the dough, you flatten it, you stuff it, and then you put it in your hand and you squeeze it. And then something, I mean, it will come out, you know, like this. You cut it, and then you flatten it with the back of your hand, because we know when we cook these things how messy our hands become.
Yeah.
So he uses the back of his hand to flatten it, make a hole in it, and then fry it.
Yeah.
I mean, all those details, I find them really fascinating, and it shows really that the value of this book, that you know, the practical value of this book. I mean, you can easily cook so many of the recipes following his accurate instructions.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's writing for cooks, isn't he?
No, not necessarily.
Well, he's writing for people who love food.
I thought cook, not professional cooks.
No, but
cooks
he's
in general.
Well, professional cooks I'd call chefs. I mean, he's writing for people who love to cook. And he's a bit of a Julia Child about him. He wishes you well at the end of a recipe.
Oh yeah.
He doesn't actually say bon appetit, because
every recipe he says, and then and eat the dish salubriously. You know, and this is
salubrously.
Yeah.
Which is a great
charming.
word.
It's so charming.
I know. Eat it in good health. This is a generous spirit of a good cook. You know,
there's this great spirit about it, and there's a lightness about it as well. I mean, for the denseness of the excitement, let's call it the excitement, the imagination that he draws in, there is a lightness of touch. I think I'm fascinated by him. He was writing about Andalusian life in the 13th century. He actually wrote the book after he moved away from Andalusia, as Arabs and Jews, they had to flee. Can you tell us a little bit about the background of that? This is a man who's writing about food as part of his whole lifestyle and his identity. Tell us a little bit about what was happening in 13th century Andalusia.
Yeah, well, as I said, he lived until he was 20 years old in Murcia, and then, of course, the things deteriorated. It was not possible for them to stay in Murcia after the treaties was breached, because as they stayed for several years as mudajjars, what's called mudajjanun in Arabic, they were allowed to practice their Muslim rituals. But then this treaties was breached. They had to leave. They went to Ceuta first. They stayed several years, and then they went to Bijaya, and then several years, and then he settled in Tunis for the rest of his life. And of course, the Muslims and Jews kept on fleeing and fleeing all those years. And I think that, he felt that this beautiful cuisine, these beautiful dishes he grew up on, they might, disappear with the fleeing of those people. So he did it, I think, for as a nostalgic gesture, and he did it also for his country that he yearned for, So and so he wrote it, and it's like a labor of love. He wasn't commissioned. Nobody asked him to write it. And we know that he wrote it for himself and for his countrymen who are, who are losing a life that they cherished. And now, so the least I think he felt he could do was to preserve it in this form. He was a literary man. He was well revered. But it's ironic that of all the things that he wrote on history, on literature, and all other things. But of all the works that survived to the present is this cookbook. So this tells you, something about the importance of...
Well, absolutely. I mean, as I was reading it, I was thinking of Claudia Roden, actually, who's in our audience today. We are honoured. Claudia, your work was so important in gathering the recipes of the diaspora as they fled from Egypt, from the Middle East. And, this is what this man was doing, wasn't he? He was very aware that his culinary heritage was being taken away. I mean, Arabs and Jews were being forced to eat Christian food, to eat pork, as part of the sort of the breaking down of morale that always happens with conquest. But it was the writing down. It's a moment, I think, of real rebellion. I love this man. I have to say, I really like this guy. He's got real spirit, hasn't he?
Yeah, he does.
But he wasn't a scribe. Being a scribe was a profession. He wasn't. Tell us a little bit about the scribes of the time, whose job it was to write down the history of the moment.
Well, he was a scholar. So he was interested in hadith, religious hadith, and he had his students, he had his followers, and he followed others. He wrote on, he wrote some, he wrote on poetry, on literature. He was his interests were diverse. He wasn't only interested in the religious texts, for example.
Yeah.
So it's natural that cooking, writing about cookbooks should be part of his interest. And what interests me even more is that he was in advance of his time for considering cookbooks as eligible for, for being we call today bedside reading.
Yeah.
He realized that reading a cookbook is not, it's not necessary that you cook the dishes from the book, but reading them is really a major source of entertainment, because he says this himself. At the end of one of his chapters, it's a very long chapter. So he said, I think I have mentioned enough of this dish, and even though you don't end up cooking those dishes, but there is, there are wonderful sources. You can learn so much from them. They are entertaining sources. And he said, I can say this for the rest of the chapters. So I think, he's the first one, who said these things that I know of. I don't know anybody who said this before our modern times, that cookbooks can be read for pleasure.
Yeah. Sam, let's bring you in on that. You write prolifically. Cookbooks are absolutely a part of our modern life. We don't just like to do recipes, we really want to hear the stories behind that. When you see a book like this that was really undervalued, it wasn't seen at the time as something that could give that insight into lifestyle, into stories of the people. How do you see the work that you do in comparison? It's a different world, isn't it?
Well, I suppose every book is of its time, and so we only write recipes of things that interest us and intrigue us and that we want to do. And so our recipes, many of them we were gathered from travelling, and then of course there was a big crossover with he was documenting the dishes which gave him pleasure and influenced him and meant something to him, and to a degree we're just doing the same.
Yeah. Can we talk a little bit about your fantastic trip? So, in the spirit of Al-Chajubi, I know you didn't know who he was at the time, but, the two of you took a camper van down through the same area, down through Andalusia, gathering stories, picking up it must have been pretty much the same kind of food, because it hasn't changed very much, has it?
No.
And then into Tangier. Sam, do tell.
Yes. Well, just to give you a little bit of history about Moro, as you said earlier, we'd worked at the River Cafe, and when we came to start thinking about opening our own restaurant, we didn't want to, just do an inferior River Cafe, and we hadn't travelled much to Spain, and Sam was really interested in the Islamic world and had sort of several trips to Pakistan when he was young. And so we thought, well, Spanish food on its own is wonderful, but we also loved the Middle Eastern side of food cooking, the lighter herbs and vegetables and salads and spices. So just by marrying the two, it was obvious it was the Moorish world that we had to, was our inspiration. And therefore, we, as you say, took a camper van and drove all around Spain and Morocco, armed with, Claudia's book and Paula Welfoot's book. And we were literally going around trying to find, having read certain recipes in the book and trying to see them being made so we could understand and bring them back to London. Yes, and that is what you did, didn't you? You took the time to really go deep, and it's not just how food is made, but the context. Yeah, to feel it inside. So when we're back in the kitchen, we shut our eyes and we imagine we're back in the soup somewhere. Because we really want to recreate those dishes and make them as real as they possibly can be. Did you have a sense at the time that Britain would be interested in it, or was it your absolute passion that just led to the restaurant? Because in 1997 you opened Moro. I mean, this wasn't a great time in British food. It was beginning. No. It was beginning. But I mean, most restaurants were pretty rubbish at that time, weren't they? There was a kind of, what happened at the Eagle and obviously at the River Cafe was changing everything, and it was opening people up to the idea of stories. Again, Ruth and Rose at the River Cafe were telling stories about the tiny little villages in Italy that each one of them cooked things in a different way. Food had life to it. I know that it was a very influential time for you at the River Cafe in particular. Is that what you were trying to do? What was the intention of the trip? Yeah, we just knew what type of food we wanted to cook, but we weren't thinking about anyone else. We were just really focused on that and trying to cook as authentically as we possibly could be, with the sense of history in each dish. So we were very focused, weren't we? I mean, we were just...
I suppose also because of the camper van, the idea was, it didn't totally work out like that. The idea is that you could go to the market and you could buy the ingredients which gave another layer of authenticity to the food. So, we might, have a green almond and use that which you couldn't get in other places. We might use the sheep have this huge fat on their tail, and we might buy the fat from the tail. Every now and then we might sort of see if we could buy some camel and things like that. So it was just trying to have experiences and to be able to buy ingredients and shop and just learn as much as anything from the ingredients as well. Yeah.
And bring things back. We brought back lots of mahama, the wind-dried tuna that you couldn't get. I mean, in 1997, it was really difficult. I mean, pomegranate was not an everyday word.
Well, I mean, Dostoevsky was only 2010, wasn't it? I mean, it feels like we've been eating this food forever. I remember reading something in The Guardian about, I think, 2007, which, said the meze, which was from Moro, was the next big thing. I mean, it's extraordinary that it's so much part of our culture now. It felt like we were all like baby birds, desperate to be fed something interesting. But it was story. And if you look at the most interesting restaurants, I don't know if everybody agrees with me on this one, but for me, the most interesting restaurants, and certainly the most interesting cookbooks, are those that are about story and people and identity. 25 years on, at Moro, are you still finding new things to say through your food? I know there are a lot of things that are still on the menu, but I mean, are you still finding new things?
Yeah, I mean, Sam, proudly reminded the chefs last week that here we are, this is a new menu that we're cooking, and at least 2/3 of the dishes, we change our menu every 3 weeks, and at least 2/3 of the dishes that we cook are brand new, like we haven't cooked before. So, we love discovering new things, and that's what stimulates us and keeps us going. And when we're stimulated, our chefs are learning too. So,
but this book is a huge wealth of inspiration. I mean, and I haven't even begun really to do it justice. But so we're very lucky, because I have to say, in 25 years, the countries we visited have changed so much. People aren't doing things in the old ways as much. So unless you're very lucky and you can go to people's houses, or you can, you can't go to the streets of Tangier and watch people, eat the pastries from the street vendors. So we were lucky that we had that experience, but also now we have a window into doing things the old ways and keeping that, alive.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, that, we are talking about real authenticity here. We are talking about the food from that particular time. And we're talking about a time in British history, British food history, when people were so desperate for those stories from around the world. We'd all started travelling a lot as well and coming back with food that we'd tasted, that we wanted more of it and we wanted them in our cities. Now, we would be talking about cultural appropriation. We've been through the fusion stage. We know we don't like that word very much, do we? How do you feel about, do you use the word inspired by, or how do you feel about the cultural appropriation argument, where whose job is it to tell those stories through food?
Well, I like the word she said, marriage of
I noticed the carefulness
of the word. This is, I think, the best way to describe it.
Yeah?
Mm. I mean, food's always been evolving, hasn't it? Yeah. So it's just marriage, or it's just evolving, all creative pursuits, if you can call it that, evolve with every generation.
Yeah. Well, we're going to ping those two ideas back together with these 4 food moments. Now, in your boxes, Sam, why don't you explain what you've done here?
I think something about the text.
When you open your boxes, it should be a symphony of beige.
I thought I was going to ask you a question.
And but
why vegetarian?
It's not. They're just meant to be evocative, little tastes of things which really sum up the flavour profile of some of the dishes. I had to do them that they could be transported, that they could be done at advanced sort of practical things. But
they are taken from the book.
They're absolutely taken from the book.
They are based on the recipes in the book. You are eating 800-year-old recipes by Sam and Sam Clarke from Moro. That is a pretty special moment.
They're not past the sell-by date. Don't be put off.
So the green... Oh, yeah. The green omelette you see is taken from those pages. It is called Isfiria. It is...
Everybody see?
I cheated.
Okay.
The Isfiria is a very flat omelette. And you look at it, you notice it is green because juices of mint and cilantro are mixed with the eggs. So they are made very flat because according to the recipe, you need to roll them, like the way you roll a piece of paper, And then this roll is cut into slices, and these slices would be fried. And once again, when you read this recipe, you notice how, the style of Al-Tujibi, how exact he is, how, meticulously describing meticulously described are his instructions. For example, he says, don't make them thick, because then it won't be easy for you to roll them, which is true. They will break. And he said, when you fry them, don't crowd the skillet with those pieces. If you find they are crowded, take some out, and then continue cooking. all those details.
Yeah. And what did you do with the Sam? Did you change them? Obviously you did.
We've been making tortillas at Moro, but then, and we were sort of, you'd have chop your potatoes and you have your onion, and it was very sort of Western sort of potatoes and onion. And it was sort of, and then suddenly to have this omelette, tortilla, but Al-Andalus omelette with these layers of flavour. It's amazing.
And also, this
and
is
delicacy
the first
of the texture.
Yeah, this is the first time in this recipe as Nawal says, you squeeze the herbs, so you whiz them and you squeeze them so you get the juice out, and it's the juice that goes into the egg, not like we would instinctively do, which would just be chopping the herbs. So again, we've learned something from that.
And
it's more delicate.
That theme comes across in quite a few of the recipes where you don't use the
recipes,
you don't use the herbs in it. You squeeze you get the liquid, which allows the subtlety of texture not to be interfered with.
It happens in so many recipes. I mean, when I tried the recipes, there are 22, I think, modernized ones. I remember I prepared juice, so much juice from cilantro and mint, and it's not difficult it's not easy to extract juices from those herbs. So I had to improvise and add, help it with some water so that at least it yields some of the... I don't know how they did it, with all the pounding and the mortars, but even with the food processor, it wasn't easy.
So we've also got the sprouted broad bean.
I just finally want to say about the omelette.
Yep, go on.
Is a new thing which I didn't... The book has so much vinegar, and I didn't really associate...
had so much
vinegar used.
Yes.
So the eating suggestion with this is that you make your omelette and then you reduce some vinegar and you drizzle the vinegar on it. And again, in all my years of making tortilla, and that sort of, to me, transforms it. You just get that little bit of freshness and piquancy, and that's such a clever thing which again has been lost in the 800 years. I've never heard that before.
Wow. Amazing.
Claudia had something to say about it.
We're going to go to questions in about 5 minutes. Promise, we've got about 45 minutes for questions and answers. I'm sure you're all desperate to ask questions, and we will do it, but I just want to go through. Let's just go through them. They are the sprouted broad bean, the lentils, the paper-thin omelette, and the hawal, the nougat. Sprouted broad beans, Sam, you've ever sprouted a broad bean before?
Well, I've known about sprouting pulses from getting more nutritional value out of beans. I've heard about that before, but not. But neither of us realised how sort of common, and even nowadays, for example, in Egypt, sprouted broad beans that you just don't eat the skin and you just pop the inside into your mouth is still very common. It's called full nabet. And so that, and actually when we had dinner the other day at Moro, you told us, no, you don't eat the skin, So again, we learned about that.
Whatever you do, don't eat the skin. I hope no one's ate the skin.
He was
Hands up if you've eaten the skin. Oh, no,
you have to train your waiters to go around going, no, it's not how they did it 800 years ago.
So first of all, we were told, so I spent hours looking for small broad beans. So I said, we don't want these big, tough, leathery things. And then I was said, no, for this dish, it's very important. You have the big brute of broad beans, and then, but you just squeeze. Oh. You just squeeze out the centre, and then you eat them. And they're a very traditional.
I mean, during the dinner, he was talking about this. What is this leathery texture or something? I said, what leathery texture? I mean, I took it for granted that people don't eat the outer skin. I didn't know. I mean, we practice it in Iraq.
In the recipe, it doesn't say so. It assumes that no fool would eat the outside.
No fools like the Brits.
No fool would eat the fool, yes.
There we go. Yeah. The Syrian lentils have been on your menu right from the beginning.
Yes.
Of course, they are absolutely a part of, Middle Eastern food for, Claudia will tell us as well, I'm sure, forever. What have you done with these ones that are any different from yours?
Well,
the recipes
really... Again, the layering of spices, the use of saffron, which we've personally never put in lentils, and then the vinegar. Yeah. So we've never put vinegar in our lentils. We've never put saffron in our lentils, and this suddenly had this layers of flavour, which.
Interesting. Now, the nougat is, we would make nougat with a digital thermometer, obviously not around 800 years ago. Nawal, can you explain how he would have made nougat?
It's all by experience. They don't need any gadgets to measure. And they go by, for example, in other recipes, in other books, he would say, if you take a drop of the sugar, of the honey or the boiling sugar, and put it in cold water, you will see that it becomes solid and it easily breaks. So this is, it is done. So they go by practice. They know these things.
Yeah. Are you too well practiced enough to know how to not use a digital thermometer?
No, absolutely not. But it's the ancient terms, isn't it? The hard boiled and soft.
Yes.
Yeah. Let's just finish before we go to questions from the audience. What did you, Bink, Mr. Poison Medicine Alchemy Man, what do you know now that you didn't before, other than well done for looking very closely indeed? And thank God for email.
I know now. I guess it just highlighted for me that when you open these really, very early books, these old manuscripts, first of all, each one is going to be completely different. So we have many copies of the same texts in different manuscripts, but each one's completely unique, handwritten, different owners, different marginal, things written in the margins, doodles, all sorts of things like that. And you just never know what's going to be between the covers. The other thing that it reminded me of and really drove home is never trust the catalogues, never trust librarians, never trust the curators.
I always hated
They don't know what's in there. Look for yourself and you don't know what you're going to find.
Well done, and thank you for finding it. Now, what will you take into the rest of your life from Al-Chajut to Jubi?
I think we should take cooking seriously. It's really an art. It's it's an important thing. And if he found it like 13th century, in the 13th century he found it really that significant, so we might just as well, value what the knowledge we have to preserve it, and we have to enjoy it and entertain others with it.
Absolutely. Sam, what would you take from the book?
Me?
Well, let's go to Sam. I notice he always looks at you every time I say that, so I think that's deliberate. Samuel Clark, Mr. Clark, what would you take from the book?
numerous things.
I had hoped you might say fermented juice.
I'm going to be researching the fermented juice, and of which there's different types, but it's a...
That was something that you hadn't found before.
No.
One of the very few things that was a real find.
And it adds sort of a piquancy and a richness to the dish.
It is called murri. The way they made it, the Arabs made it, was cereal-based. They use either barley or wheat, and they make those sauces. Whereas, for example, in China, they use soybeans. The Romans, for example, they use fish in order to make those sauces. I think these are important. From ancient times, they found that those sauces are important because they have the umami taste in them. And they didn't know how to describe it, but they insisted on using it with whatever ingredients they have in order to achieve this, kind of complex text in our dishes. Nowadays, we use the tomatoes. We don't need the murri.
I think also, it's always been very apparent that there's such knowledge about food as medicine as well, and now we all know that fermented things are really good for you. And so a lot of the pickles which are done were always fermented pickles.
Yes.
They weren't... We think of pickles as you get your onions and pour vinegar on them, which is a sort of, in a way, a dead pickle.
Yes.
But really, most of when things are referred to as pickles, they're fermented, and we all know that fermented things, incredibly important, and that was even before they had antibiotics to fight, to have to replace your gut.
So what would you do at Moro with your fermented juice? What will you...
Well, we have fermented juice in the kitchen all the time because we make sourdough bread. So there's always an element of we have it, but this is taken a bit further, and this is allowed to get more sour, but and more complex probably. So it will just be experimented. But anything which needs which are the main recipes? Which, I mean, a lot of recipes have it in them.
A lot.
Yeah. So we're going to
go back through the book.
It is one of the main recipes.
Lovely.
But I mean, I have a question. Didn't you wonder why you are having vegetarian dishes? I mean, Middle Eastern the cuisine is famous for its meat dishes. That is, they chose it. Besides, it's it doesn't have meat. It can stay longer fresh. But I think Bink he is specialized in those texts, medical texts, and he can say
not
something.
really. It's just, in the British Library manuscript, this cookbook is sandwiched between all these medical texts, some of which are about the different food ingredients that go into recipes like these, and talk about them from a nutritional point of view. And certainly the vegetables were thought to be very much, light on the stomach, aiding digestion, but also bringing all sorts of healthful qualities, and were particularly recommended for ill people, or to keep from getting ill. And that tradition goes on very late in the Arabic-speaking world, doesn't it? I mean, I'm looking at another manuscript recently from the 19th century, from 19th century Syria, at a time when there was an epidemic going on. I can't remember what it was now, cholera, I think. And the doctors there were recommending vegetarian diet to begin with. Absolutely vegetarian diet.
But then those dishes, that were prescribed by physicians, they were already there. They were cooked by Christians, for their Lent, Lent fasting. Yeah. So it started with religion, and the doctors saw that those dishes without meat, meatless dishes, were quite healthy for...
And still goes on right across Greece, right the way through the Eastern Mediterranean.
So what they did is what they called them muzawarat, which is counterfeit dishes. Counterfeit because you are cheating the sick people. You are not giving them meat, but you are giving them the semblance of meat. So muzawarat. So you are eating
fake food. Sam, Samantha.
Yes.
What's the thing that you have taken from the book that you will take in tomorrow or your life?
I mean, I think for me, it's just the privilege of, reading through and seeing these ancient recipes, and I feel very privileged to be able to make the recipes and to be serving it to our customers for other people to enjoy that might have been lost. So
it's
for me,
really quite extraordinary,
very special.
So we had the thin omelette on the menu last week, and it's changed now, the menu, but with some white asparagus in the middle. So we blanched the white asparagus, and then we heated up by grilling it on the barbecue, and then we sort of made a sort of parcel with the thin omelette with the white asparagus in the centre, and so we've used
and then the vinegar, the reduced vinegar on top.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much. Let's go to the audience. Polly is going to come around with some microphones. The lady with her hand up about 10 minutes ago, she definitely is going first.
What surprised you? Was there anything that surprised you or amazed you about the dishes or the foods?
Okay, I'm really impressed by the complexity of the dishes. Some of the dishes, especially the stuffed birds. They are so elaborate. The recipes are so long. It takes me such a long time to translate all those excruciating, steps of, one step from the other with all the variations on it. If you don't like this, then you can cook it like this or cook it like that. Yeah. So it strikes me with the complexity of the dishes, some of the dishes. Yeah. I mean, this is unprecedented.
What I find pretty amazing is that they were specifying not just cinnamon, but they would say cinnamon from Ceylon. Yeah. It's amazing. In that day and age, they are already discerning. No, they're not just happy to get any cinnamon. No, cinnamon. They wanted cinnamon from Ceylon.
And that's really interesting, actually, because this was a time of massive sort of spice trade, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
There was a lot of influences. There were a lot of travellers from all over the world heading all around this area, and they were being influenced themselves. I mean, just a very quick question. When did those the recipes sort of land, particularly in Andalusia, for example. And maybe Al-Tajubi talks about this. When did the influence from all the travelling, well, the Moors, settle to create a stable Moorish culture?
Yeah, well, it started, if you read, from the cookbook we have from the 10th century from Baghdad, we know that it goes back to the 9th, 10th century during the golden times of the Abbasid period when travel was really active, trade was so to and fro India, China, and all the way to the, through the land routes, the Silk Road and the sea routes through the Indian.
Mass cross-pollination of ideas.
The Mediterranean, the sea routes through the Red Sea down Indian Ocean and the land route to China all became part of one political, religious organization.
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody loving food. That's what I love about it. Gentleman here in the front. Well, can we just wait a minute for the microphone? Thank you very much.
If we go back to the question of vegetarian food, I grew up in Egypt, and if you were sick as a child, there were two things that you be given, which is vegetable soup, which obviously to rest your tummy and everything, it's sort of like no contamination. And the other one is the full nabbit soup, which is the beans that we just had. But it was actually made in a soup, so you have the beans as well as the soup, and that would actually cure you.
So that was
interesting.
We might know it now as stimulating the gut, wouldn't we?
Yeah. So that was like one of them would give you all you need, the other one would give you the protein, which is the food. So anyway, I just wanted to add that.
That's really interesting. Somebody at the back.
Quick question on: is there an ingredient in the book that you found that does not exist anymore at all and you would not be able to source?
Well, there is one ingredient that really puzzled me, which doesn't occur with most of the ingredients, we do have them nowadays, especially the ones that deal with food, just daily foods. But in the chapter where you have the hand washing preparations, there is one ingredient that really puzzled me. It was called bunk. You mix it with other ingredients, aromatics, and then you wash your hands with them. It removes the grease from your hands after eating. After doing so much research, I got to the conclusion that either it was derived from the acacia trees or from coffee beans. Either it was bunk. I was encouraged by the book by Ockers, all about coffee, because he says that bunk, he called it bunkum, was mentioned by Ibn Sina, by Al-Razi, that is back to the 9th century. I went to their books, and sure enough, there was bunkum. They don't say what it is. It is a known. So he says that it refers to coffee beans, particularly coffee husks, because when coffee bean started to be used, they didn't use the bean. They didn't use the bean themselves. They used the husks. That is up until the 14th century or so. So I said that this ingredient might be coffee husks or coffee beans crushed and mixed with other. Of course, what really convinced me is that every time they mention bunk, they said it has to be toasted. And we know coffee beans are nothing. They don't smell of anything without toasting. So this is also another thing that confirms my identification of the ingredient. In my book, I have an appendix. I dedicated a whole an article on this. There's an analogy of tea. We all know that tea is we started using tea from the 19th century or so. But in fact, the Arabs knew tea right from the 9th century. It was called shah. It wasn't used as a drink. It was used as a medicinal ingredient, and they said, the pharmacist said that it was brought from China. That's why it was called Shah, like from China, Shahsini. It was brought, and it was used as a cure for headaches and other light ailments. So I say, if tea was from the 9th century, well, then why weren't those coffee beans used in order to wash our hands? I tried crushing coffee beans, coffee husks, and I chopped some garlic and then rubbed my hands with the coffee beans, and the odor was gone.
With the husks as well, just the husks?
No, with the husk, with the husk.
Just the husk, yeah.
They have the same properties, the husk and the beans. And nowadays we have shampoos with coffee beans. We have, so.
Yeah.
You can
Thank you.
Yeah, you can put coffee grounds in your refrigerator to absorb the.
Who's got another question?
Okay.
Thank you. Yep.
Based on the ingredients that you just described and the complexity of the recipes overall, is there anything that you can infer about the type of people that would be using these recipes or the occasions? This is for feasts, for every day, for the poorer people, for richer people?
Yeah, well, as with cookbooks, people who are, who don't have the means, they don't use cookbooks in order to cook their dishes. I mean, but cookbooks are written for the well-to-do, for those who have the means, especially with those dishes that have an abundance. I mean, you have to use lots of spices, lots of ingredients. So you need some money in order to cook those dishes.
But Al-Tajibi wasn't writing for anyone other than himself at that time. He describes the food that he ate, and he was a man of high standing.
Yes, correct.
And so he describes a world where people were eating some pretty lovely food, weren't they? They had access, let's say. Yeah.
The elite, elitist,
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Microphone behind you here.
Yeah. Yes, can you tell us what sort of vinegar we should use to supplement these dishes? Verjuice or the cherry vinegar wouldn't have been an option.
Wine juice mostly.
Yes, cherry vinegar.
Yes, well, wine juice.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes, okay. Not balsamic.
No, just regular. From the recipes.
A good quality red wine vinegar, but a good quality one.
Yes.
Yeah, there's a chapter.
Yeah.
There's a chapter for making vinegars, and it was made from figs, white grapes, red grapes. So it was all wine, grape-based.
Thank you.
Yeah. Whereas in Iraq, for example, it would have been date-based, because that is where the dates are, where they grow.
Do you have to make alcohol before you make a vinegar?
No, not necessarily. Those are the recipes. We have in the book directly from grapes.
It's just fermented juices.
Yes.
With the mother culture.
With the mother culture. But they talk about using wine vinegar, which they say it's halal, it's permissible, because when you convert wine into vinegar, it loses all those unpermissible, those forbidden, this forbidden stuff.
Okay.
Lovely, thank you.
Question is, when and how did the manuscript enter the British Library?
Yeah.
So we were looking at that the other day, yesterday.
Yes,
Was it 1925? No, I can't remember.
Yes,
I think 1920. So it was sold by a gentleman named David Fetto, who I know very little about. I've tracked him down through the wonders of the internet and found his high school yearbook. He was living in Baghdad. He was a Jewish resident of Baghdad. His father owned a pharmacy. And I know very little about him. But his name appears every now and again on the last page of manuscripts in the British Library, where they recorded who they bought it from. So he had obviously at some point either became a manuscript dealer or came to the UK with a trunk full of manuscripts. Where he got it from, I'm not sure, but it was clearly produced in Northwest Africa, and then had moved all the way across, all the way east out to Baghdad, and then all the way back to London.
Wow. Interesting.
It's had a bit of a journey itself.
Yeah, wonderful. Who can tell that story? I don't suppose anyone. Yeah. Nice question. Thank you. Who else has got a question for us? Thank you.
Do you know how long it took to actually write the book?
How long it took to write the book?
Oh, we don't know when he wrote it exactly. We don't have this information. If you ask me how long it took me to type...
That's another story.
But he was 66 when he died.
Yes.
He was 20 when he moved to Tunisia.
He could have been in his 30s, early 40s, but I don't know. But I assume it should have taken him a long time. Yeah, and especially with a lot of cross-references. I mean, as I told you, the book is divided into parts into chapters. When he talks about beef, the beef chapter, and he repeats the same recipe in the chicken, for example, like sikbaj, he would say, you cook the chicken the same way you cooked it in chapter 1 and part 2. I mean, such a memory. I mean, for me, I use the... of course, I search the file, it's so easy. Yeah. But for him, I think it must have been really, he must have really
Is there evidence that he was working from, like, a cod file or something? Because you have some of the medical texts that were written first as notes, so you could imagine it like a file cabinet, where someone would write notes of, drugs that would work well for one thing and for another thing, and then it allowed them then to rearrange at a later date, once they've got a lot of recipes, they could rearrange them into categories and that sort of thing.
Did they use this in medieval times?
Definitely. Arazi's, for example,
he did?
Kitab al-Hawi was made that way. It was actually put together, it was his notes, arranged sort of loose leaf, and so he could rearrange them. Yeah. And he never published it as a book himself, but his students then put it together. Oh, so I don't know if there's...
Yeah, well, perhaps he was a scholar and he knew about these things. He must have, but they also, scholars used to have good memories. I mean, they were...
There was also
write down recipes that they want to remember, right? The ones that work well and are good.
Yeah. But that kind of visceral way that he was writing about it, he really inhabited those recipes, didn't he? And so maybe that sort of memory kind of helps as well. You do tend to remember things like that. Any more questions? Yes, the one next to you there. Oh, right, lovely. Sorry, where? Hand up again. Elizabeth. 1 minute, Elizabeth.
Did you, Nawal, have a hand in choosing the illustrations? In which case, where did you find them?
I chose them all. I was the one to choose them.
Yeah, where did you find them?
Oh, in the museums. We are so lucky these days that they are digitizing them and that they are in the public domain. I mean, it's like a gift, from the museums. I used to pay a lot of money for the copies of manuscripts, for a permission to use an image, but now it's all free, and the images, they are in so high definition that you can, choose details from them in very, very excellent quality. Wow. I'm really grateful for this.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. We've run out of time. I'd just like to say that I can imagine this entire panel, Sam Clark, Nawal Nasrallah, Bink Hallum, and Claudia Roden and Al Tajubi at my fantasy dinner party. Can anybody imagine a better way of spending an evening? Thank you very much to the British Library and to Polly Russell, who I think is going to jump on stage and say something lovely.
I'm just very quickly going to say a huge thank you, of course, to you, Gilly, for your really just very, very elegant and lovely steering of this conversation. I hope you all get some sort of sense of this extraordinary man that we've been talking about in this amazing text. And I feel like his generosity and his enthusiasm, we're sort of channeling Al Tajubi here with these people. And I want to just do a sort of chronological thanks. I want to thank Bink Hallum for being a brilliant curator and for finding the manuscript. Yes. Amazing, absolutely amazing. The very best of the British Library here. He says don't trust the library or curators, but you can trust Bink Hallum. So I'd want to thank...
Don't take our word for it.
Yeah. I definitely want to thank Sam and Sam for entering into this project with such enthusiasm and such curiosity, and for so generously sort of pulling together these beautiful samples, and for just being conscious and thoughtful and wonderful chefs who have changed the way that we think about food. I want to thank Brill, who've published this extraordinary book that is just completely beautiful. It's packed with not just his words and text, but all the contextual. They just have not scrimped. This is a real, just a most beautiful text. And it is, of course, a labour of love. We owe huge thanks to Nawal, who dedicated years and years of scholarship and thought to producing this beautiful text and many others. So to Nawal, thank you so much.
Thanks for listening. Please do get in touch on social media. I'm at Cooking the Books with Gilly Smith on Instagram, where you can also follow my adventures in 21st century cooking with Leith's Online. And you can check the show notes and on Instagram for full details of how to get a Cooking the Books discount on Leith's cookery courses. And I'll see you next week when we're with a winner of the Great Cookbook Challenge, Dominique Wolfe.